This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Mark Dikeman, Kansas Farm Management Association Executive Director, kicks off the show as he reviews the 2025 agricultural economy for Kansas by discussing the biggest factors of net farm income. KFMA economists Glenn Conover, Katelyn Reiff, Mushrush, Dillon Rapp, Jonie James, and Andrea Seaton keep the show rolling as they break down what they saw for farm income in their regions. Ending the show is K-State Extension horticulture expert Matt McKernan, saying using quality potting mix, ensuring adequate drainage, and choosing the right container are the keys to successful container gardening. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Thursday show hearing from the Kansas Farm Management Association to discuss the farm economy for the past year. And then to talk about it, we're joined by Kansas Farm Management Association Executive Director Mark Dikeman. Mark, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having us, Shelby.
Mark, for Kansas, how has it been looking?
2025 was, I guess, an unexpected year for us. We ended up the year with net farm income across the state averaging $212,494. We did not, going through the year, we certainly did not expect income to be nearly that high. We came off of 23 and 24, where we averaged about $100,000 of net farm income in each of those years. So to jump to 212, almost 213, was quite a surprise. Kind of three main contributing factors to the high profitability in 2025. We had some good yields throughout the state, especially soybeans. Government payments also had a significant impact on profitability this year. We've got some figures on that as well. And I think it goes without saying that beef profitability or beef income and all livestock income in general was very high in 2025. We don't have a large number of poultry or dairy or swine producers, but all three of those, in addition to beef, had showed strong profits in the year. In 25, we averaged, the average farm had about 1,800 crop acres. That's slightly up from the last several years. Kind of indicates maybe that farms are overall kind of growing in size. That's to be expected a bit, I guess. Our average corn yield across the state, listeners keep in mind that we're dealing with the northeast corner of the state all the way to the southwest corner, and a very diverse agronomically as you go from east to west. Our average corn yield across the state, about 127 bushels. Average soybean yield across the state, full season soybeans, average yield of 50 bushels, which is really surprising. Wheat averaged about 58 bushels. Not a lot of milo acres in Kansas, or not as much as there has been, but averaged 92 bushels. Double crop soybeans averaged 35. Irrigated corn was just shy of 200, 197 bushels. Irrigated soybeans at 66, and irrigated wheat about 73 bushels. That corn yield, the dryland corn yield, is about a almost 40% increase over the previous 5-year average. So there's been some high yields in that previous 5 years, but there's also been some lower numbers. Soybeans averaged about 48% higher than that 5-year average. Again, a pretty big jump. And double crop soybeans, compared to that previous 5-year average, about a 68% increase in yield. So bushels can contribute to profitability even when prices are not as strong as what the producer might expect.
And what factor did you see government payments playing into that overall $212,000 income for Kansas producers?
Again, government payments were a significant factor. Livestock related government payments across the state, about $5,400 average across all farms. Crop related government payments, almost 105,000 average. Total between the two, about a just over $110,000 average government payments for each farm. Now, I will note that the numbers that I'm giving you, the income numbers, all on an accrual basis. And with that accrual adjustment, one of the things we did with government payments in 2024, because the ECAP payment was known and earned in 2024, we treated that as 2024 income. So the cash for that payment was received in 2025, but that payment we accrued to 2024 income. We did the same thing with the Farmers Bridge assistance payment, which is coming here in 2026, but we knew what that amount was or could reasonably estimate that, and it was earned in 2025. So that Farmers Bridge payment is counted in that net income figure. SDRP, the Supplemental Disaster Relief Program, that averaged just short of $39,000 average per farm, and the Farmers Bridge payment averaged about $51,000. So between the two of those, that was about almost 82% of all government payments received. And of government payments, that accounted for almost 52% of net farm income. So a significant portion of that net farm income did come from government payments. And I'll note kind of along with that, we kind of look at a net crop insurance. So indemnity payments that they received, less premiums paid, was actually a negative number average for the state. So more was paid across the state in premiums than was received in claims. And that was about a negative about $5,200, $5,300. When we combine both of those together, both crop insurance and government payments, it accounted for about 49.5% of our net farm income. So still a significant portion of that income came from those two programs. I'll note that the total 2025 government payments received was significantly more than 2024 payments, but 2024 government payments accounted for about 70% of our net farm income versus about 52% this year. So contributing piece to profitability in both years. Another note that looking back all the way back to 1970 when KFMA started completing these accrual farm income calculations, if I adjust government payments for inflation, 2025 was the second highest year going back all the way to 1970. 2021 was the highest year, inflation adjusted. If you remember back to that time, we had a lot of COVID-related disaster payments, things like that contributed to the high numbers then. So kind of surprising that not only was 25 as high as it was, but looking back through the history, it's number two in terms of inflation adjusted government payments over that time.
And what was that last factor you mentioned of being a big contributor to 2025's net farm income?
The final part that explains high net farm income in 2025 is really coming from livestock, and particularly the beef sector is a major contributor. We did look at, kind of broke down of the farms that are included in our summary. We looked at farms that had zero livestock income versus farms that had at least 30% of their gross income, or value of farm production is our measure of gross revenue, at least 30% of that VFP coming from beef. For crop only farms, net farm income averaged about $125,000. And for those farms that had at least 30% of their revenue coming from beef income, whether that's cow-calf or backgrounding or finishing, net farm income was about $289,000. So those farms, they did well in 2025. It's a little shocking well, I guess not surprising when we're seeing record high, historically high beef prices, fed cattle prices, calf prices, that cow calf and backgrounding and finishing operations would have incomes that high. But that was a significant contribution to high net farm income for 2025.
So, Mark, how would you summarize 2025 net farm income?
Income was higher than what we probably anticipated or expected. I guess I would also say that it doesn't reflect on what's coming in 2026. We know that global issues, global influences have changed the cost of inputs dramatically without a huge change in output prices. So the outlook for 2026 is not nearly as rosy as what we saw in 2025. But those years where there is good profits, there is profitability, that we sure encourage our producers to save away, to prepare and be ready for lower years.
If people are wanting to find out more information, where can they go?
Much of the information that we discussed today, as well as significantly more detailed information, is available at AgManager.info /KFMA.
Mark, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you very much.
That was Kansas Farm Management Association Executive Director Mark Dikeman. As he mentioned, you can find more information on this by going to AgManager.info /KFMA. I will link it in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but stick around because we have more for you up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show talking with Kansas Farm Management Association economists, as we will talk with one from each region and hear how their area was doing in 2025. We start in Northwest Kansas with Glenn Conover. Glenn, how are things looking in Northwest Kansas?
Accrual net farm income come in just over $256,000. That's roughly $45,000 above our 5-year average. Government payments made up 90% of the $256,000 net farm income. We did see, however, in some areas that members could produce their way into economic profit. 2025 was actually the first year since 2019 that crop insurance premiums were actually greater on average than the proceeds that were received in the year. Crop yields were actually some of the best we've had in the last 5 years. Dryland and irrigated wheat yielded close to 5-year averages at 40 and 60 bushels per acre, respectively. Dryland milo yielded 20 bushels over the average at 75. Dryland corn's 91 bushel average was close to 40 bushels over our average, while irrigated corn yielded just shy of 195 bushels. Our cow-calf enterprise averaged just over $300 per cow unit. That's, again, profit over cash and economic cost. If you're looking at farm type on the net farm income, the crop cow herd for us actually averaged over 315,000. We're really on average seeing liquidity and solvency still in what we would consider safe ranges. Going forward, as Mark mentioned, the sentiment maybe is a little different than what the financials are detailing, but we certainly have to continue to mitigate risk in a seemingly changing environment daily.
Next, we head over to North Central Kansas with Katelyn Reiff. And Katelyn, how are things looking in 2025 in your area?
2025 shaped up to be a much stronger year for producers compared to 2024. Average net farm income for North Central came in at approximately around $215,000. Our beef producers continued to see the benefits from such a strong cattle market over the last couple of years. Average net farm income that kind of just encapsulates all of our beef operations reached around $318,000, making livestock one of our stronger commodities again for 2025. On the crop side, we looked at our crop-only farms, and they averaged around $133,000 in net farm income. One thing worth pointing out, though, is that close to 75% of that income came from government payments. So government payments came in to be around $101,000, making net farm income, excluding those, around $32,000. Our corn averaged around 135, milo 101, soybeans around 51, double crop soybeans 32, and wheat came in around 57 bushels an acre. After some pretty dry stretches, the improved moisture conditions were definitely a positive effect for these farmers. Looking specifically at crop net return to labor and management, soybeans and milo were the two crops showing positive returns compared to corn and wheat. Overall, 2025 was encouraging and showed improvement from prior years. Even so, there is still reason for caution and close attention moving forward, especially on the crop side where margins remain tight and government support played a significant role in profitability.
We continue across the state to Cole Mushrush in northeast Kansas. Cole, what were you seeing?
So in 2025, the net farm income for the Northeast Association was $200,703. This is about 10% higher than the 5-year average for the Northeast Association. Government payments for the Northeast were $51,000, which is 25% of our net farm income for the Northeast, so much lower, I think, across other areas of the state. Crop insurance proceeds were about $6,000, with premiums being around the $20,000 mark. So premiums exceeded the crop insurance income by quite a bit. And most of those payments were from flood damage there last spring. Kind of a different story than some other places. And so yields then in the Northeast were the highest they've been. So for a 10-year average, beans and wheat were both the highest they've been in the last 10 years, and corn was the second highest. Wheat was 72 bushels an acre, and beans were 59 bushels an acre. And then the corn was at 165 bushels an acre for the Northeast part. Again, livestock was a main driver in the Northeast part. The livestock value produced was almost double the previous 5-year average, and it was at $335,000 for the Northeast part of the state, driven by, record high cattle prices predominantly.
Next, we head south to southeast Kansas with Dillon Rapp. And Dillon, what were you seeing for this corner of the state?
So 2025 in southeast Kansas would really reflect the summary Mark Dikeman gave from a state perspective. We had a net income that was just over double what it was in 2024, right at $225,000 per farm on average for the net income. Our value farm production, which is the way we measure total farm revenue, it's an accrual measure of total farm revenue. It was over $1 million for the first time in our history. So we grossed over $1 million of revenue per farm, and that was up about 16% from the previous year. Our expenses, on the other hand, were only up about 3. And when we dive into that, it's really government payments were a big driver. Our government payments were right around $100,000 per farm, so that's about 40-something%. And then beef cattle were a big driver as well. We've got a lot of beef in our part of the state, having some of those core Flint Hills counties, as well as a lot of backgrounding that goes on in those counties around that too. And then a lot of cow-calf operations. And they did tremendous, as you would expect with anyone that's seen what the price of beef cattle did on a graph throughout 2025. And when we really dive into the crop enterprises, things are a little more mixed. Our yields were pretty good across the board, but with the price environment and the input cost environment, the profitability just wasn't quite there in some cases. So on the crop side of things, our soybeans really saved the day. The price was pretty good comparatively when we look at what our input cost structure is on the soybeans, and we were able to squeeze out some economic profit. The corn and the wheat enterprises on average were able to cover the variable costs, the cash costs, to kind of get those in and out of the field, but they returned a negative overall return to management when we factor in some of those non-cash economic costs.
Heading back to the west, we're joined with Jonie James from South Central Kansas. And Jonie, what was happening in 2025 in this part?
Well, drought conditions finally lifted for the South Central area in 2025, which led to average to above average yields. Unfortunately, we continue to see a decline in commodity prices for those crops. The net farm income for South Central was $147,502, which is the highest we have seen since 2021 for our area. The value of livestock produced continued to be positive for South Central and increased by 81% from 2024, landing at $115,618. This increase is really credited to consumer demand, which is great. Government payments, especially those ad hoc payments, played a significant role in our overall net farm income for South Central producers, who received an average of $108,245 of government payments in 2025, which really equates to about a 73.4% of their net farm income. Now, net crop insurance did not play as big a role in net farm income because in 2025, our producers actually paid out $3,109 more in premiums than they received in proceeds. When we examine the four quartiles of producers, those in the top 25% saw a net farm income of $393,418, and our lowest quartile reported a net farm income of negative $28,763. The big focus or difference really is on managing those production costs. The top 25 report a crop production cost per acre of $311.77, and that lower 25 quartile is reporting a significantly higher production cost.
And we wrap up around the state in southwest Kansas with Andrea Seaton. Andrea, what do you have to tell us?
In some areas of the region, there were better than average yields, while other areas experienced some extreme drought and crop failure. The spring brought excessive rainfall, which certainly did boost our fall crops. However, the additional moisture did present some challenges. The moisture, it also did affect the timeliness of getting the wheat crop harvested. Switching gears, the fall crops yielded some of the best historic row crop yields that we've seen in years. However, the price was still pretty painfully low. To make matters worse, not only were producers dealing with low grain prices, but our input prices have continually been on the rise. We have seen a lot of our farms utilize grain storage on the farm, but then at some of the co-ops across the region, there were grain piles that set. One bright spot to mention for 2025 was livestock. 2025 was a year defined by record high profitability and market prices driven by tight supply and high demand. Late in the year, though, the profitability did remain high, but the market began to experience some volatility. Wrapping up our 2025 analysis season, net farm income came in at $167,189, which is significantly up from our 2024 net farm income. Government payments made up about $129,421 of this, which is roughly 81.1% of total net farm income. Net crop insurance for 2025 was negative $9,921, which we didn't see very many payouts because there was a significant amount of moisture, which helped some of our yields. Our average family living, including income tax, was around $128,994. Just further confirms that the year would have looked a lot different had we not received those government payments.
We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back.
Welcome back to Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. Container gardening in Kansas allows you to grow vegetables and flowers in limited spaces by taking control of soil, water, and sunlight. K-State Extension horticulture expert Matt McKernan says that using quality potting mix, ensuring adequate drainage, and choosing the right container are key factors for container gardening. Matt, we're getting closer and closer to that summer planting of garden crops, but as we look at maybe some options in terms of maybe not a widespread garden, sometimes containers can do just as well.
Yes, containers are a great option when it comes to landscaping in any location. Containers can be great on the patio or balcony, they can be great on the sidewalk or doorstep, and especially in areas where we have poor soil that's hard to grow other plants, a container garden is an excellent way to successfully grow plants and add color, beauty, and interest to all parts of the landscape.
I guess the real question here is, how do I match what I'm trying to grow with the size of container I need?
That's a great question. Ideally, we want to make sure, more importantly, that all of our containers, whether it's something decorative or something kind of utilitarian, they have drainage holes in the bottom of that plant. Because ideally, we want to make sure that we have good water movement through that container. And so every container has to have at least one drainage hole in the bottom. We also want to make sure that that container is a little bit larger, both in height and width, than the plants that we're going to be planting into it. For our annual flowers, that's often easy to do, to find a container that's bigger than a few inches tall and wide. But maybe if we're looking at a patio-grown fruit plant or other shrubs, We just want to make sure that the roots have at least 2 to 3 inches in each direction to be able to grow sideways, and at least 2 to 3 inches to grow downward as well.
Once we've decided what we want to plant, we need to find something to plant it in, right? Not only the container, but the soil.
Yes, so picking the container is important, but also picking what we fill that container with is also very important. One of the mistakes that a lot of people make when it comes to container gardening is putting a lot of random objects in the bottom of that pot, whether it's packing peanuts, empty water bottles, sometimes even just rocks. All of those things can be an effective way to reduce the amount of potting soil that you would need to put in that container, but it really also influences the way that water moves through those containers as well. So ideally what we want to do is fill our containers with potting soil from top to bottom. By avoiding putting in water bottles or other objects, rocks at the bottom of those pots, we really reduce the amount of layers of objects that the water has to hit in order to be able to drain from those pots. And so what we want to make sure that we do is allow water to pass evenly all the way through that potting soil by not hitting objects or layers of other debris. And that's going to help the containers drain and not be waterlogged or soggy at the bottom where roots aren't able to grow. If we do have a large container that is maybe larger than the amount of potting soil we have, instead of adding rocks or items to the bottom of that container, it would be better to purchase a smaller inner container that we could set inside of that larger container. And again, fill that smaller container completely up with potting soil, and maybe then setting it inside the container. Oftentimes we can stack bricks or other objects inside that outer container so that we get the inner container at the right height so you can't even tell that it's 2 separate containers. The other mistake that we want to try to avoid when filling our containers is not using garden soil or topsoil. These types of soil are a lot denser and don't drain as well, and so it really makes it difficult for our plants to grow in. We really want to focus on using just potting soil to fill our pots, and that's going to be a mixture of peat, vermiculite, perlite, different products that are really designed to help both hold water inside the pot, but also drain water well so that the roots don't basically flood or drown out at the bottom of the pot.
In terms of watering, we want to make sure that we're not over-watering?
Yes, we want to make sure that we don't overwater our container, but it's important to keep in mind that most containers are going to need more frequent watering than our landscape plants will. There's less soil available to hold water, and there's often more wind and sunshine beating down on that container than we typically do with an in-ground pot. So when we water our containers, we really want to make sure that we water until we start to see water exiting the holes in the bottom of the container. Once we see that happening, we know that we've really wet down that entire soil root ball from the top to the bottom of the container. And flushing out some of the water out of the bottom of those holes also helps drain some of the salts and other things that build up in our soil that may limit our root growth of our plants.
That's K-State Extension horticulture expert Matt McKernan. To learn more, contact your local Extension office. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.